Today, we have the pleasure of having Sarah Thiessen. Sarah is a licensed marriage and family therapist and a licensed professional counselor. She holds a Bible degree in youth and family ministry and a master's degree in marriage and family therapy. She's also the founder of Splankna Training Institute, which is what we're going to focus on today. And that's in Denver, Colorado. And Splankna, kind of a tricky name there, is a Christian protocol for energy psychology. And this is going to be a fun interview. Hi, Sarah.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
I'm glad to have you. So let's just start at the beginning. When and how did Splankna come to be? You are the founder of it, and it's a great story. So let's start by sharing that.
Okay. Well, Splankna happened. First of all, Splankna is New Testament Greek for the subconscious. Technically, literally, it's bowels or guts, which is, the worst possible word to name anything. But it's because when I was an undergraduate getting a Bible degree, our Greek professor one day was talking about this word, Splankna, and how it means bowels, guts, but it was used figuratively the way we use the word subconscious, like a gut sense or intuition, that kind of thing. And so many years, yeah. And so many years later, when it was time to give this protocol a name, I figured it might not be a coincidence that one of the only Greek words I remembered was splankna. So yeah, that is the name. So this all came about very, very much as a surprise to me. I would not have guessed it in a bazillion years. I was raised in the Church of Christ, which is very conservative theologically. And I went to a Church of Christ university and undergraduate in Bible, which in the Church of Christ itself was kind of a coup because women don't do ministry then. It's not quite as conservative now, but so then graduate degree in marriage and family therapy, and my plan was to do talk therapy, regular, what most people think of as counseling or therapy. I wanted to be a part of one of the national Christian group practices, maybe Minirth-Meyer, Samaritan Counseling Center, both of which I did get positions out of grad school with both of those folks. And then every time I would get those positions, God would just shut the door and cut my needs off, is how it felt at the time. And he kept opening all these doors for private practice, which is not appropriate when you're right out of graduate school. And I was single, it's not really logical to go into put out your shingle as a private practitioner in marriage and family therapy when you're not married and don't have a family and, so, but it seemed like all he was going to let me do. So by the third round of this, I was like, okay, Lord, if this is all you're going to let me do, then I'm doing it. And if I starve, it's on you. And so I did and took that route, and almost immediately all of this started. This mind-body category of things started because of an elder at our church, Dr. Brian Martin, who was a chiropractor. He's with the Lord now. He became an influence. I don't know what Brian would say about it, but from my point of view, God used Brian to sort of annoy me into the mind-body questions, because he wouldn't get off my case for a good solid year that I had to go look into all of this energy psych stuff, which at the time I thought can't possibly be God, because that's all New Age witchcraft. That can't possibly be God. And so I kept blowing him off, and the story is all written out there in the Splankna book, but basically God orchestrated a situation where I couldn't deny a remarkable experience. I saw somebody go from really captive in a phobia to free of it in front of me in about 45 minutes. And I was not able to walk away from that and blow it off. I had to understand what I had just seen, why it was effective. Do the mechanisms involved in that even belong to the Lord? If they did, how would a believer use tools like that and not be diving headlong into New Age? Because the energy psych tools generally have been so absconded and developed from a New Age point of view. So that began about a 7-year period where I always say I felt like he was holding me under his thumb for those 7 years. Like I couldn't get out of the questions about where where are the lines between what you created versus what all the false philosophy that the world has assigned to these things? Where do those lines lie, and why are they there? And he would wake me up, and then I would wake up in the night with questions like, what about this and this thing in the word, or this thing in experience? And instead of answering me, he would say, yeah, and what about this and this and this? And just drive me nuts, right?
Yes.
And so,
Yes.
yeah, it came about that way. And as I was developing it, I never had it in my head to make an institute like we have today. I was just trying to obey this impulse that he was putting on me, see as much change as I could in my own clients, and stay within spiritual boundaries.
Right. And briefly share that story that was transformational, because it is such a good story.
Sure. So I had been working, I had a contract at the time with the Catholic Diocese down in Colorado Springs. I'm in South Denver. And so I would go down, I think it was Tuesdays and Thursdays, and work with the folks that they were asking me to down there. And this was regular traditional marriage and family therapy, talk therapy. I had been working with a young couple for a while, and we were doing closing up, saying goodbye, because they were moving with the military and they were moving to Hawaii. And we had been working on marital conflict, communication, regular stuff. And as we're saying goodbye, it's been so great working with you, she brings up how afraid she is to fly, and how you have to fly to move to Hawaii. So she was really stressing about that. And I had just been to, because Brian wouldn't get off my back, I had just been to this little weekend training for what's called thought field therapy. Thought field therapy was developed by Dr. Roger Callahan, out of chiropractic and out of psychiatry. And it's a collection of what he calls algorithms. So they're orders in which to tap on acupuncture points, mostly in the torso, head and torso, that the order of tapping is thought to correlate to helping unlock larger categories of emotion. And so I had just been to this training and thought it was just honestly one of the most ridiculous things I had ever seen. Because literally thought field therapy, the way it was taught to me at this training was, so you have the client tune into their fear, and then you have them follow you like Simon says, and they tap through these points, and then they get to this triple warmer acupuncture point here at the end of the algorithm, where they do what Callahan called the 9G sequence, where you have the client circle their eyes and circle and close them and open them and counting and humming, and it's this whole really wonky kind of thing. And the practitioner who's training us in this says, yeah, so the client does that. They follow you through all this tapping and counting and humming, and then everybody feels better. And I just thought, I'm just going to kill Brian for dragging me to this stupid thing, because I just couldn't. I was like, I can't believe I wasted money and time. Right. So then, I don't know, it was a couple months later that I'm down here with this client saying goodbye. She talks about this phobia. And I said, I don't think it'll work, but I just went to this training thing that's supposed to be so great with phobias. Do you want to give it a shot? And for no reason that makes any sense, she was like, sure. So I start walking her through the tapping sequences. So she's following me. We're tapping down the face and everything. Now, I don't tell her this, but the way that it was trained was, you're supposed to go through the round of things once, and then check in with the client and ask for what they call a SUD level, which is SUD. It's subjective units of distress. You're supposed to ask for like a 1 to 10. So on a 1 to 10 scale, how intensely can you feel this fear, whatever the one is that the client's focusing on? So, and what they say in the training is, each round through, the client should report about a 2 number lowering each time. It should go from 10 to 8 to 6 and so forth. So I didn't tell her that, but I asked her each time, and she was following the rules. She was saying, well, it was at a 10, now it's about an 8, and now it's about a 6. And I'm thinking, okay, sure. So we get down to where she can't find the fear. She can't call it up anymore. And we're sitting there, and she says, well, but I'm not on a plane. I mean, if I was on a plane, I would. And I said, yeah, that's what I'm thinking. And she says, well, I have another phobia we could test. And I said, oh, yeah, what's that? She said, well, I have terrible phobia of elevators. Well, the building we were in had an elevator. So by now we're a good half an hour past session time, and we're just we're four-wheeling. And so I'm like, okay, why not? So we start over again. All right, get in touch with that fear of the elevator, feel it at a 10, right? We go through all of our process. She gets down to where she can't find the fear. And so I say, okay, let's go test this thing. So I remember her husband is there. He was sitting on my left, and they had a little newborn toddler. I don't know, maybe she was 6 months old. She's asleep on his shoulder. We get up and we're walking down the hallway and chatting about whatever. And we get to the end of the hallway and turn the corner where we can visually see the elevator down at the end of that hall, which was pretty far away, actually. And as soon as she sees the elevator, she hits the floor in terror, like a cat in front of the bathtub, right? She's like on the floor in terror, and I'm standing over her going, this does not look promising, right? But we're in the middle of it, right? So I'm like, okay, look at me, follow me, tap right here, right? So I'm tapping her through the process again. She calms back down and everything, and she's okay to look at the elevator, but she doesn't want to walk to it, right? So we just incrementally, right? We do go through around, and little by little, it takes, I don't know, an hour or so. We get to the elevator. She's able to take the elevator rides and everything, and her husband is standing next to me with the baby on the shoulder, and we're watching the little numbers, they're going up and down the elevator, and he's looking at it going, I can't believe this. As long as I've ever known her, she's never been, I can't believe this. And I'm standing next to him, and I go, I can't either. And you would think that I would have gotten in the car that night and driven home and been thrilled, but I was not thrilled. I was kind of wrecked because I didn't know how to make sense of what I had just seen. I didn't know why it worked. I know the scriptures well enough to know that if I have just not only gotten myself into witchcraft, but I've brought somebody else into it with me, I might as well have a millstone around my neck and be cast into the sea, right? This is no casual thing. And I didn't know how to answer those questions. I didn't know if I had just stepped into a realm of witchcraft that was really dangerous, and I got myself in a lot of trouble. I didn't know how to make sense of anything. And so I drove back up to Denver that night pretty upset and crying out to the Lord, like, I don't know what just happened. I'm really sorry if I shouldn't have done that. I don't want to dismiss and walk away from anything that's yours and that's beautiful and that's powerful and that's good. Because I don't understand or because I'm afraid. And so that started the 7-year process. It was really, at the time, it was scary, honestly, because I knew that I couldn't trust my own judgment, right? My own judgment is fallen. Everybody's is. How would I know if I was crossing lines I shouldn't cross? How do I know if I'm in deception? That's kind of the definition of deception, right? So it just started this whole season of I felt like I went with fear and trembling in very slow steps and a lot of like careful checks. And I would always just say, I have to know that you will hedge me in if I step out of line. If I start doing or thinking something that is not okay, it's not in line with you, I've got to know you're going to like bring me back in line. And there were several times he did over the years correct and bring me and say that's out of line, that's not okay. And he would tell me in lots of different ways, through other people, through just a check in my spirit at times, through a scripture at times, sometimes through godly counsel. The godly counsel part was really hard though, because there wasn't anybody to ask, because anybody who understood the scriptures and my concern didn't really know about energy psych to discuss it. Anybody who knew about energy psych didn't know why I was worried, right? So it was a really weird time. And so what I did was I did a lot of like careful, slow trial and error. Like I just kept searching the scriptures. I researched the different energy psych modalities. I would try a little something with a client that was well established, who I trusted their spiritual boundaries, maturity, so forth. And just little by little over that time period, what came together both was, on the one hand, the clarity about where are those boundary lines and what they mean, why they are where they are. That came together, but also what came together was a protocol that was so fruitful and so consistent and so useful that by about that 7-8 year mark, Heather, who runs the Institute with me now, Heather Hughes, you're going to have her on soon here, I hear.
Yes.
She was the first person, she was a client of mine at the time. She was the first person to say, you can't be the only one doing this. You've got to teach this to other people. You've got to spread this out. And that hadn't occurred to me until that point. And then, so that started in 2004-ish, maybe. And now we've trained over 6,000 practitioners in 9 countries. And it's Splankna practitioners are out there changing lives every day in Jesus' name.
Which is so amazing, such an amazing tool. And I want to get more into the tool, but before we do that, I really feel like the audience needs to understand just of how beneficial and how quickly this tool can be effective. So can you briefly just hit on a few other stories of how people would come to you with this, and this is what, the result was, and then we'll get into the nitty-gritty of all of the other stuff.
Sure. Okay. Let's see some favorites. So Splankna applies basically to anything that is emotionally rooted or spiritually rooted. So anything that you would go to a counselor for. So anxiety, depression, anger issues, shame, and then physical things if they're emotionally rooted. So, and you can't, which a lot are, yes. You can't always know, but yes, a lot are, yeah. So, yes. A good example, a recent example, let's use just because it's fresher in my mind. A young man who comes in because he's gotten to a point where he's a very accomplished, skilled college player playing wasn't soccer, it's lacrosse. He's a lacrosse player, really skilled, lots of experience, and he's gotten to this place where his anxiety has risen so strong that he's throwing up and passing out sometimes before a game. And so he comes to see me to go, I don't know what's going on, help me out with this, right? What Splankna does is a client brings in a symptom. They say, so we call it symptom A, right? This is what I need to work on. We bring that thing before the Lord, and in opening prayer, and we're asking God to search through the database, because the assumption in energy psychology is that every emotion, every memory, every thought has its own little signature frequency, and the body stores those like a walking database. And so we know from the Psalms and the Proverbs especially that the Spirit of the Lord is like a lamp that searches through those secret hidden places, those storage places in us. And so we are asking the Spirit of the Lord to do that, to search through the client's database and to mark out for us where ground zero is behind a symptom. Because we do assume that every symptom has a reasonable beginning of some sort. Especially it felt reasonable at the time when a person went through whatever the trauma was. So for him, his root goes to about 18 months ago when all of this started up, when he got a big, he got called out, got really humiliated, had made some kind of a mistake, and the coach made a big dramatic public thing about it in front of not just his teammates but the other team and parents and such. That was a very public, like big, and that his soul reacted with this sense of anxiety and pressure, and everything I thought I could relax into about my skill and take for granted, now I don't trust I can relax and take for granted. I got to be on hypervigilance, right? And that posture had just built and built until he was making himself sick, and we could have talked that through for years. We could have talked about how there's no reason to, that the anxiety isn't serving you, that you are safe to trust your skills. We could have even talked about the coach and that experience. But when you're talking something through, you are dealing with the part of your being that's already on board for life, for change, for health, for strength, right? There's got to be some kind of way to get underneath, down into those deeper places that act more like the seat of the flesh, that act more, current psych would call the subconscious, the deeper places in us that align with our symptoms against what our logic wants to choose. It's like in Romans 7, where Paul talks about the very thing I want to do, I don't do, and the thing I didn't want to do, I did. That whole thing. What he's describing is that there is a conflict between seats of the will. And the conscious mind is the place where you're trying to choose life. So talking about a problem, it's kind of like preaching to the choir. Whereas Splankna is a way, and it's not the only way, but it is a way to get down underneath into that level, that level of the will that buys into the anxiety, that buys into, in his case, it buys into the throwing up response and the hypervigilance, and says it has to be this way. It's the only way to keep myself from another event like that humiliation, right? So that's an example, right? So in one sitting, he's released from that. His next game, he's his regular self again. He's not nervous. He can't believe it, right? I mean, that's a typical example of how it goes. Yeah.
Our emotional cups can get full without us really even being aware of it. But when our emotional cups get full, we can react rather than respond. We can be fatigued. We can feel burdened. We have struggle with sleep. We can have physical symptoms. And that's why I have the free Barf Notebook page for you. And it's a simple process done regularly where you're barfing out your thoughts, sorting them out, and planning them out. And it's a wealth of healing in that. So go ahead and check the link and have access to that free Barf Notebook process. Live brighter every day. And that's what's so cool is the speed and just how effective it is. And it's not just emotional, it's, mental, physical, and all of it can be taken before the Lord. So it's just so fascinating. I want to get now into more of when you develop this is a combination of a lot of different mind-body therapies that you've coalesced together, and put under the Lord and, created Splankna. What are the different, because I know, within the podcast we talk about some of these things, but can you just explain the different ones that are a part of Splankna?
Yeah, so there's three main camps in energy psych that I drew mechanisms from back when I was first putting it all together. So when I went and researched all the different ones, there are about, 12, 15 different established styles of energy psychology. When I went and researched them all, what I noticed was they have this one thing in common that I call circuitry plus intention, meaning they are all different styles of how you engage the acupuncture system or more formally, the meridian system of energy in the body. It's what acupuncture is based on, what chiropractic utilizes as well. And so that system in the body, which is in a scientific sense still a theoretical system, that it would be the circuitry part. And all the different styles are bringing in acupuncture points in different ways. Like, for instance, one might do only the acupuncture points around the earlobe. You might use reflexology, which is the acupuncture points along the bottom of the feet. Callahan's design was, rather than just holding an acupuncture point, you would do algorithms, which are orders in which to tap. So different styles of circuitry, but they're all using some style of circuitry and then combining it with the intention, what the client is remembering, feeling, thinking about, imagining maybe. And so that's the mechanism that was consistent across the board. So in psych, we would call that the agent of change. That's the mechanism of change, the thing that is assumed to be what actually causes a shift, is that combination of intention and touch in some form. Now, interestingly, since you were asking about this, there, in all of energy psych and in all of theology and medicine and traditional psychology, nobody knows yet why combining circuitry and intention is as effective as it is. There's still quite a bit of guesswork and mystery. No one knows why this works, honestly, which is something, if you're going to be a practitioner in Splankna, you just got to get comfortable with. But that is the truth. There's a lot of mystery. When I first told my husband about all this, when we first met, I gave him the whole big long spiel, told him the whole deal, and he listened quietly at the whole thing. And at the end, he said, "That may work for different reasons than you think." And I was like, yes, it might. You're right. That's very true. Yes, we aren't exactly sure what the mechanism is. Yeah, all we know is that consistently it's fruitful, but we aren't exactly sure why. So the three camps that I drew from were thought field therapy was the first one. It's the one that I told you about a minute ago, and that comes from Roger Callahan and his work. He had a background in, he's passed now as well. He had a background in I believe it's psychiatry and chiropractic. He was working with a woman who was water phobic, and he was just in frustration and feeling like he couldn't get anywhere. He just tried something out of the box and said, think about the fear while you activate these acupuncture points, which he knew about because of his chiropractic background. And the way he tells the story is he kind of accidentally cured her. And in the effort to figure out, okay, what did I just do right, accidentally, right there, he ended up developing his set of 8 algorithms. So that's one camp. That's actually, I'll get back to that. Camp number 2 comes out of neuro-emotional technique, which is a chiropractic protocol. And it is the one that Splankna uses about 80%. The other 2 I combine in a clinically unique way, and they are actually the lesser ones, which surprises everybody when they hear what number 3 is, because it's so well known. So neuro-emotional technique out of chiropractic is, instead of algorithms, you just have the client, we call direct access. They just directly touch an acupuncture point. So this would be a lung acupuncture point, as opposed to a thyroid point or a pituitary point, and then there are others along the torso. And so in NET, neuro-emotional technique, the circuitry plus intention is just holding the point while thinking about whatever the emotional content is. And then the third one is EMDR, which stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And it is the one that is by far the best known. It's also the one that is by far the most embraced by the traditional psychology field. It's got way solid research behind it. It's much more established and considered legitimate in professional circles. And it's not considered energy psychology. It is mind body, but it's not, they don't intend to be addressing the acupuncture system per se. The mechanism in EMDR is about bilaterally stimulating the brain hemispheres. So Dr. Francine Shapiro developed that. By the way, the Walkers, a husband and wife, developed NET. I don't want to not credit them. They, as far as I know, are still living and still running their institute. So EMDR by Francine Shapiro is different styles of how to stimulate the right and left hemispheres of the brain bilaterally, so right to left to right to left, while tuning into whatever the trauma. So their circuitry plus intention. The circuitry part would be the bilateral stimulation as opposed to utilizing acupuncture points.
Yes, that is so fascinating. I think what would help, it was so funny, I had this conversation with my parents because, Splankna, I start energy psychology. It actually ended up going pretty well, Sarah, in the end. But boy, my dad wrote me a 1-page letter of all of his thoughts first. But it ended up working out really well. And I think, one thing that helps people understand, because, we're throwing out a lot of terms, and I think it's helpful for them to understand briefly, well, what does a session even look like? Like, how are we doing that? Can you just give a quick, this is what we do, start with this, go to this?
Sure.
How that works out in a session.
Sure. So almost always, when a client comes into a Splankna session, they're bringing a heart's desire. They have what we call symptom A. So they have the thing that they have been fighting to change. They haven't been able to change it. They need some help. So the practitioner would get a history behind that, like you would in any other form of helping. And then to begin the work, we go together in prayer. We bring the issue before the Lord. So because the assumption is that the client's body is carrying a record of all their life experience, and that if we had a way to kind of crack open that database, we could trace today's symptom right down to ground zero. So we're asking the Spirit of the Lord to do exactly that, to search through all the life experience, including, by the way, any generational echo that they carry as well, to search through those things and to find and mark for us ground zero behind an issue, including all the steps that the Spirit of the Lord has for us to take in that session. So and there are many elements in that opening prayer involving the submission of the will, and we repent of and shut the warfare down. There are a lot of steps, but that's kind of the gist. And then when we come out of that opening prayer, we are assuming together that invitation is something that the Spirit of the Lord does respond to. And so we're assuming that the Spirit has gone through and marked out our steps. And so what we use another mechanism called muscle testing, muscle response testing. Muscle testing is based on the theory that any major muscle in the body that's somewhat isolated will respond to energetic shifts that go off in the body. So the theory is that your body, if you could see your body through energy lenses, The body is always in kind of this gentle flux between balance and imbalance. And so if you cause one of those shifts from balance to imbalance or back again, an isolated muscle reacts to that almost as if it gets switched on or off electrically, like if you turned a light switch on or off. So the client will hold an arm out forward. We use just a deltoid test, which is real typical. So it's a 90-degree angle here and a locked elbow, gives a little bit of isolation to a deltoid. And the practitioner presses there on the wrist. Now, because a muscle will react to these shifts, these energetic shifts, when the practitioner asks different questions of the client, the intention, what the practitioner means by the question, has its own signature frequency. And that literally passes between two people and hits the client like match or mismatch. And that shows up in a weak or a strong muscle response. And so the muscle test is kind of like a crude little yes-no response system to give the practitioner a way to ask the client system as a whole. So spirit, soul, body, conscious mind, subconscious mind, the system as a whole. So where in your database did the Spirit of the Lord just mark for us? What age? How many emotions did you feel in that moment of trauma? Where did you store each of those in the body? And so one by one, the practitioner follows. The protocol is one of our core values in Splankna is that the practitioner is following the lead of the Spirit that is laid out in opening session rather than following their own judgment or the judgment of the client. That following posture is really one of our core values. And so the practitioner is following through that muscle testing process. So with those questions, what age, what trauma, and one by one, each emotion is thought to be, in this theoretical framework, stored in the body at those different acupuncture points. So let's say we were doing, the example we give on the website is, let's say that I have a fear of heights and it came from a trauma when I was 5 years old. I was playing around with my brother. I fell off the bunk bed and broke my arm. And mom had this huge response and passed out in a panic attack in the bedroom, and the ambulance came and it was a whole, right? And so from there, I end up as an adult with a fear of heights. Now, if we all have, to different varying degrees of intensity, we all know what it's like to have a reaction that we can tell from our logic is bigger than it needs to be. Whether it's an overreaction of fear or of anger or shame or of pain or of guilt or whatever it might be. We all have moments where if we could freeze frame this one moment in life and kind of step out of it and look at ourselves, we would be able to say, this moment calls for maybe like a 4 on a 1 to 10 scale and I'm reacting at a 9.5. So what's my deal, right? Well, what my deal is that in this one moment, whatever's happening in this moment of my life, it's like it double clicks all the files in my database that are associated with or remind me of this moment. So I walk over to a window. If I have this trauma about height in my history, I walk over to the window. My eye sees the height way down to the ground, and it's as if my brain says, okay, this sensory input of seeing this distance between me and the ground, what associations do we have with this? What does it mean? And so it double clicks all my files that relate to height. And if my files are full of trauma, then up to my screen flies all of this intense emotion that's associated with, attached to my memories that relate to trauma. Now, that process of relationships between things in the brain, that's going on nonstop, constantly in all of our minds. That's how we process experience. That's how we make sense of every sensory input that comes our way. We make sense of it through the big web of association that we have with everything else we've ever known in our lives. So train of thought, got all into the weeds. So if the client came in and said, I've got this fear of heights, their adult logic knows very well that this fear isn't rational and it isn't necessary and it doesn't serve me. In fact, it really annoys me so much that I'm here in counseling going to pay you to help me release it, right? So conscious mind is on board. So we could talk about the fear of heights and how unnecessary for the rest of our lives. And I'm just preaching to the choir. So what we do in Splankna is we say, Lord God, would you search through the database? Would you take us to the moment in time where this fear first got its hooks in? And so one by one, the client would hold the point where each emotion is stored in the body, and they would they would just sit with for a second that emotion. They would remember feeling that emotion in the time of trauma. And for reasons no one quite understands yet, the body seems to react to this combination of touch and thought like a little combination lock, like a prompt to let go of the little frequency of stored emotion. The metaphor that's usually used is it sort of dissipates out of the body, and we don't know why. And it doesn't just dissipate out temporarily; it dissipates permanently for some reason. And so it's literally like opening up the file that's related to height and cleaning it out of all the intense emotional association that used to be attached to the memory. So the memory of falling off the bed and breaking my arm, it stays the same. But all the strong emotional intensity attached gets neutralized. Now, so far, I have described to you, other than the lead of the Holy Spirit, I have described to you, it would look fairly similar if you did this work in a secular context. The differences here are, first, that we aren't assuming that the client's subconscious has this grand wisdom about where they need to go work and what they need to heal. That is what the secular world assumes. We know that that isn't the case. And so we rely on you, Spirit of the Lord. You know what this person needs, and I don't, and neither do they. And we're going to follow where you take us. So that's our first big difference, right? But then our second big difference comes here. When all the emotions are cleared out of the way, now we're going to attend to what we know as believers because of a biblical worldview. We know that things that become symptoms in our lives are not only made up of our traumatic memories and the emotions we feel. They're also made up of another element, because there's also a spiritual realm, and we have a spirit. We're not just soul and body, and we also have an enemy. And we know from the word that our enemy looks for openings. He looks for vulnerable moments. He waits like a prowling lion, right? And so in our moments of vulnerability throughout our lives, whether we're vulnerable in grief or fear or pain or shame or desire even, the enemy attempts to capitalize on that vulnerability. It's almost as if he kind of whispers little options in the back of our mind when he thinks we might bite on a hook, you know? And so sometimes those little options are as thin as like, here's a lie to believe. Sometimes they're all the way up to like, agree to this entire symptom set for this promised payout, and anywhere in between. And so once all the emotions are out of the way, we then go and identify together. So what was the offering of the enemy in that moment that you bit on like a fish on a hook, right? Because I think the majority of the time we are able to turn these things down. I think usually we choose life. I think if that wasn't the case, we'd be in much worse shape than we are. But the times when we can't choose life and we do end up biting on one of those hooks that's offered, those are the times that end up translating into symptoms. As opposed to, sometimes you'll go through a trauma and you'll adapt really well. You'll come out stronger. You'll learn. You'll like grow limbs because of it, right? Other times you go through a trauma and it becomes a long-term, lifelong symptom. I think the difference is the one time I was able to turn down the offer of the enemy and choose life, trust in the Lord and his offer. The other time I couldn't quite trust in the offer of the Lord, and I bit on that hook of the enemy. And so when the emotions are out of the way, then we identify what that offer, that agreement, and we go and break that. So we come full circle back into prayer. We revoke the agreement with whatever that strategy, whatever that lie, whatever that vow, whatever that symptom I agreed to. And now, because all the emotional glue is out of the way, now I finally can say, from my spirit that is alive in Christ, on behalf of my whole being, in Jesus' name and authority, I revoke the agreement I made with that symptom, that whatever. And we can pull it out like it's a thing, like it's software. We can pull it out of the soul, out of the spirit, out of the body, throw it out to the abyss. We can remove the rights of the warfare and put it out to the courts. We can ask Jesus to come in to the place where that symptom has been operating all this time, and download in the offer he originally made, the thing that I wish I had been able to take him up on in the moment of trauma, right? Bring that thing in, let that live there now. And then I walk out of session permanently different. And it isn't about my willpower. That's one of the main weaknesses of traditional counseling, is that change tends to be motivation based. It tends to be reliant on my willpower, which is why it runs out. We can't sustain that forever. But with Splankna, I just am different now. I literally walk out of the room without the intense trauma emotions that I walked in with in a permanent way. I couldn't get them back if I tried. I'd have to go back and be 5 and break my arm again and fall off the bunk bed and see mom have a panic attack, right? And so there's a permanence because there's a mechanistic materialness to it that isn't just about how motivated am I. It's right now to the listener, it should sound kind of too good to be true. It should sound like pie in the sky, right? And I often say to clients when I get this description, I'm like, okay, it should sound too good to be true by right about now. And if it does, you get it.
Yes.
It's crazy. It's awesome. It's like stupidly awesome is what we say all the time at Splankna. Yeah. It's now of course it misses sometimes. I mean it doesn't always hit the mark. I mean there are times when someone will come in with something that seems like, oh, that should be we should be able to knock that right out of the park, and it doesn't move, and I don't know why. It follows the same 80-20 rule as anything else. About 80% of the time, it is a beautiful, feels nearly miraculous, quick release, freedom, permanent. We just are like sloppy grateful to get to do this with our lives as practitioners. And then there's about 20% of the time that people don't respond, and I don't know why. The only thing I know for sure is I can't imagine that the Lord would allow any helping protocol to hit 100% of the time, because we would worship it in 5 minutes, instead of the creator himself.
Right. Yeah, and that's the wild thing is, that's why I wanted to start with the stories, and we talked about some of them, but there's people that have gone from like having vision challenges or having fibromyalgia or having like just lifelong challenges where it can be shifted very quickly. And it is amazing how this protocol works. And so, yes, it's pretty cool. I actually started this training for several reasons myself, because like the speed, it made sense rationally other than you can't from the Bible, although you cannot understand it completely. But it also can address generational work, which I think is amazing. It's very gentle as far as like sometimes talk therapy or, even other forms can actually be re-traumatizing. And it can actually be pre-verbal too, because I had some big stuff come up of when I was born. It was a very challenging delivery, and I was separated from my mom for a day and a half, and my little brain decided to make some, attach to some lies through that actually, I could, once that was released, was very powerful. So it's just a super neat protocol.
Yeah, that ability to get to things that are pre-verbal, as you put it, pre-conscious or subconscious, that definitely is a strength of it, because your body, your soul, your spirit, your subconscious, the database that you carry starts from when you're conceived. It doesn't wait until the body catches up to remember things. And as we even know in traditional psych, that the earlier a trauma, the more profound, the more widespread its long-term impact. And so yes, this is a way, because the muscle testing the muscle testing response that your system as a whole can give doesn't require conscious memory of a trauma. So it is a big plus of it. Yeah, you can get to womb trauma, you can get to birthing trauma, you can get to things that just are before you could remember them, which is remarkable too.
Yes, and the generational work is pretty remarkable too. So I have the book Splankna here, and so highly encourage everyone. If there's so much we could have talked about, Sarah really gets into the details of like the witchcraft, the new age. It's really a good book for people that are like, ooh, this sounds really good, but I'm hesitant because I've always had this view of that is wrong and I should stay away from it. Very helpful book. And then how, if this interests people some more, what's your website?
We're just splankna.com. So SPLANKNA. SPLANKNA. Yeah. Splankna.
Perfect.
Yeah. Worst word ever. Yes. But hey, we never have to worry about somebody stealing our URL.
No, you're safe.
Yep. It's funny. We got how they send out those phishing things. I got one of those phishing things over text that said, somebody is trying to buy your, trying to buy your website URL. You better go protect it today, kind of thing. And I was like, yeah, no, they're not. Nobody out there is trying to buy Splankna.com. But anyway, yes, it is.
Great.
It's a bizarre word. Well, thanks so much for having me on. I really had fun.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I so appreciate it, and I know our listeners will too. So take care.
You too. Bye-bye.